Welcome. We are the Mental Barbell, your go-to resource for everything mental performance. We're here to talk about sports psychology, and everything in between. Welcome to the ultimate mental performance journey. Welcome to the Mental Barbell. My name is Ian Reardon, and I'm joined today by the newest addition to the Mental Barbell team, Mr. Mike Mancini. Mike, how are you today?
Pretty good. It's snowy and cold here in northern Indiana, so we're back to winter weather, but otherwise good leading into the holidays.
Absolutely. Yeah, we call it football weather here in the Midwest, right? Getting the snow on
That's
the
right.
field and yeah. So speaking of football weather, we had a great Thursday night football game this past weekend that I thought brought some really interesting ideas for us to talk about, and some interesting things happened. So we'll kind of jump right into it. So for the folks that didn't really watch the game or watch these moments, there was a huge moment towards the end of the Seattle Seahawks and LA Rams game where a lateral pass was thrown and deflected off a player's helmet and ended up being what was later called a fumble, but really everybody on the field kind of stopped playing because they saw this pass and it was dropped. So it was this or is a incomplete pass. And then one of the Rams players just picked the ball up in the end zone, looking like they were going to give it back to the ref. But the play was still live, the ball was still live, and the touchdown counted, which sent the game into overtime. And then the Rams ended up winning. So it was really a huge momentum shift moment that I thought was something that we can all learn from. We always talk about playing, through the whistle or playing through the dead ball. And this was one of those examples where both teams kind of stopped, and then, you know, the accident led to then a touchdown and then a victory from the Rams. So, Mike, did you catch that game? Did you catch that moment? What were your thoughts?
I saw the replay, and it's happened so many times in football, and we hear the same thing when we're watching a game in person or watching it on TV, where you hear an analyst talk about playing through the whistle. But we talk about focus and concentration, and I think that's kind of part of it. As an individual player, what are your focus cues for each play? And both defensively and offensively, it's that's got to be part of the process, right? It's, hey, I haven't heard the whistle. I need to, until somebody tells me that the play's over, that's got to be part of my process each and every play to play it through. And unfortunately, it cost someone the game there, because that was a huge play and turned that game around. But it just another example of staying focused, staying concentrated on what are my cues here, and keep going through all of those until somebody tells me, okay, this play is over with. We can kind of pause a little bit and kind of reset.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sports is made up of so many of these critical moments that you never really know when one of these either errors or strengths is going to, amount to a really big outcome change. Just like we said, if you don't play through the whistle on 95% of plays, nothing really happens except for the one time that it does. And that's where, if it's important one time, it's important all the time, because you never know when that one time is going to be. So make sure that you play, every play, every practice all the way through like it's something like this. Because again, it changed the outcome of the game. It wasn't just some small mistake. It did lead to, an LA Rams win there. So, something that I also thought was, or it led to a Seahawks win, excuse me. Something else that I saw in one of the post game interviews, it was Ernest Jones was talking about how when they were down big, they were down by almost 20 points at one point. And he said like they thought it was over. Like when they were winning, they thought it was over, and we took that as disrespectful. And then they turned that momentum shift around, and so they used the fact that they were losing as gas in that gas tank to then pull out an overtime win. So I think it's also important to talk about how motivation can come from anywhere, and even when things are looking bleak, that can still be a really powerful moment.
Yeah, and I think it goes to show, we talk a lot about the emotions when we work with student athletes and teams, and uh, complacency comes into play a little bit, or comfortableness. Hey, we've got this game won, no problem, and you kind of put your foot off the gas a bit, and the next thing you know, that's how if the other when the other team then continues to work on an edge, continue to focus on their cues, and continue to quote unquote grind it out, then the next thing you know, they start closing the gap and they start gaining the big momentum. The shifts in emotions start. The team that was ahead or the individual that was ahead, all of a sudden, when they took their foot off the gas, now they feel like they got to put it back on, which it gets a little bit harder to do. And that's where games like that can come about, where you see the big lead changes and so forth. I think of the Super Bowl from a few years ago where the Patriots were up big at halftime over the Falcons, and or the Falcons were up big over the Patriots, and the Patriots came back and ended up winning. There's a big Packers Bear game this upcoming Sunday. A couple weeks ago, the Packers won the game, and now they've lost one of their big stars, Micah Parsons. And I was just reading an interview with their defensive coordinator, who talked about after that Bears game, they were so excited and so high, and he had to tell them that we still have 3 games to go. We're going to play the Bears again, and that was before Micah Parsons got hurt. So their mindset, again, going back to that complacency piece, their mindset still had to be, we need to focus. These are our important cues we need to focus on. Everybody's got a role, linebacker, defensive lineman, quarterback. You've got your cues you need to focus on. We just need to focus on those and kind of quote unquote grind out those plays, those series, and those games, and not get too high and not get too low as well too. So I think it just goes to that comfort zone. Sometimes we get in that comfort zone, and even on the negative side, we're not going to win this game. Let's just kind of get this over with, kind of a thing. That plays a part into whether you can make that comeback or not. But that whole emotion of complacency certainly played a part in that Seahawks Rams game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point that you said. It's way harder to step back on the gas, right? It's way harder to re-engage emotionally after you've already, started to release and let yourself off the gas a little bit. So that's a great point. I think, and also talking about football and high pressure situations, there's also been, a string of call them coaching scandals across football, and a lot of head coaches getting in trouble for doing some not so great things. And I think it's important to talk about the need for, support for coaches in these high level head coaching positions. Not to excuse any of the behavior that's come out over the past week, but a lot of times, in my experience in coaching and college coaching, head coaches are out on an island a little bit by themselves. They have the weight of the team really is resting on their shoulders, and a lot of their staff is, they have that excuse that they're not the one in charge, right? The buck doesn't stop with them, and so when you have this, unique kind of person that's out on an island under increased levels of stress and scrutiny, I think it can lead to some bad choices and some mistakes being made. So I always advocate for coaches to also seek mental performance support or mental health support, depending on where you think you are. But call this a PSA to all those coaches, but don't bear the stress alone, or the weight of the pressure alone. You can, talk to the same people that your athletes talk to, and get that same level of support. But I think what we've seen over the past week and couple of weeks is when those coaches aren't well supported, and they are left to maybe cope on their own and in unhealthy ways. But Mike, did you have any perspectives on these situations?
Yeah, and I think Ian, your point is well taken. I think not only at the college level, but I think even at the high school level as well too. There's just a lot more pressure, if you will, on head coaches, and it comes from a lot of different sources. And I think with the changing landscape, especially at the college level, no matter if you're the big time programs like the Michigans or the Notre Dames or the Alabamas of the world, or the MAC conferences or those mid majors of, or even at the D2, D3, and NAI level, there's across sports, there's just more and more pressure on them from a lot of different aspects, from not only what their role is, but in and of itself, and from the student athletes themselves, but with NIL dollars, with alums, with grant money that's out there, with increasing costs of everything and increasing revenue that could be a part of programs, small, medium, and large. There's a lot of pressure on those head coaches, whether they're at the football program or whether at the volleyball program and some smaller, what they would used to call Olympic sport programs. Is just a lot there and a lot that a coach has to deal with, especially as you mentioned, rightly so, as a head coach. You're just kind of out there and expected to deal with that. And there needs to be an avenue for them to ask for support on the mental health side and the mental performance side as well. No question.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're definitely not excusing either or any of the people who have been let go and their behavior, but I also do think that just across the board, like you said, coaches of all levels should seek out those helping services that can, stay anonymous and stay confidential, or maybe not anonymous, but stay more confidential, and not necessarily make these poor life choices that some of these coaches have been making. So I guess, moving on from there, I just PSA to all coaches, reach out and we're here for support, whether it be us or we can point you in the right direction if that's something that
Absolutely.
you need. So, I know we also had some football decisions made in your neck of the woods over at Notre Dame that's been making national news. I was curious if you had some reflections about that decision to stay out of the bowl games and where your head's at.
Yeah, there's as an alum and as a fan, everybody was pretty upset about the call about not being in the playoff. But I think for a lot of us, we understood the decision not to go on and move on, and I think it was an opportunity for the program itself to kind of use this as a reset and go into the off season completely thinking about 2026, both. And I know head coach Marcus Freeman and his staff are talking about recruiting and who we need to bring in, both from the high school level and what's happening in the transfer portal. But using this as this abrupt end as really as kind of a reset for 2026, and not only on the physical side and the personnel side, but also on the mental performance side. Where do we want to be as a football team mentally going into the off season, and going into fall practice and going into the 2026 year as well too. So I think this can be a real valuable time for both the staff and the players, new and existing players coming back for next year, to really use this as a reset, get their foot a little bit more into the ground. What are we doing to get prepped? So we're not in this situation next year where it's not even a question of whether Notre Dame is going to get in or not. It's just they're in and they have the opportunity to do something at that point. So although a bit of a challenge for all of us that are fans or alums or whatnot, and I'm sure the players and the staff, I think they're using this as more of a reset moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. The idea, it works so well for individual athletes to take that step back and say, let's reevaluate and then reengage. I also think there's a sense of like they're taking their future in their own hands. And so, like you said there at the end, we can sit around and wait for other people to tell us what our postseason looks like, or we can just make that decision as a team. And I think that actively choosing your future is a much more strength position to be coming from rather than just being pushed around by the committee decisions and things like that. So
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, you want to be in charge of that. You don't want that. You want to be more proactive with that, not reactive. No question about it.
yeah, absolutely. So hopefully this will be enough of a reset for those guys to turn it around and make some changes next year. But
Right.
um, yeah, definitely tough for those of us watching this year.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, moving on here to our next segment, close the book on football conversations. We want to move to some emerging research in the field. Very exciting cross-sectional study came out of a laboratory with 172 athletes, so it's a very large sample size for typical sports psychology studies. Like I said, this was a cross-sectional study that was released earlier this year. Cross-sectional meaning they surveyed everybody and then teased out any differences that they saw amongst the athletes. So the things that they were looking at here were mental toughness and its relationship on pain self-efficacy and fear avoidance. So I think it's important that we define some of these things for everybody. Fear avoidance is the idea that you don't want to do something that's uncomfortable, right? Makes sense. If you're fear avoidant, you're probably not going to want to go to the weight room and train, something like that. You're avoiding those uncomfortable situations. Pain self-efficacy, one of the other variables. This is how well you think you can tolerate pain. So somebody who is has a very high pain self-efficacy, they think they can work very hard and push their body very, very far. Whereas somebody with low pain self-efficacy would maybe stop the effort after some discomfort occurs, right? Or they might think they would. And then our last variable here is mental toughness, which is really at the core of it your ability to overcome adversity towards your goals. And so this study, again, like I said, attempted to determine the relationship between these variables. Found some interesting things. So of the 172 athletes tested, they found a negative relationship between mental toughness and fear avoidance, which means the more mentally tough you are, the more likely that you will do things that are uncomfortable. And for athletes, that's very important. That's training. That's, putting yourself in physical situations in a game and pushing yourself to that upper limit of your potential. They also found a negative correlation or relationship between pain self-efficacy and fear avoidance. Again, this makes a lot of sense. So if you're somebody that can tolerate a lot of pain, then you're somebody that's going to be willing to seek out more discomfort. You're going to train harder and push yourself further. And then the last interesting finding of this study was that mental toughness and pain self-efficacy were positively related. So that the tougher that you are, the more able you are to push through adversity, also comes along with you believe that you're able to tolerate more pain. So for us in the field, I don't think these are earth-shattering results. I think these are things that we all have experienced and know. But as with a lot of things in this field, it's nice to have some science and some data behind it. But Mike, did you have any reflections there?
Yeah, I think just to your last point there, Ian, I think it's just another. I love that we have this as part of the podcast because I do think that sometimes there's a perception of what we do, but this brings a lot of evidence-based research to the skills and strategies that we bring working with athletes and teams and individuals that are practical and real and research based, and they're not mythical or mystical kind of things. I always use the joke when I talk with teams a lot that I'm not a magic person. I'm not a magician. You're not setting salt out on the windowsill on a Tuesday and magically you'll become confident. These are real research based, evidence based practices that we all use in the sports psychology, mental performance field when we work with individual athletes and teams. And some of the individual findings within the research just goes to show again, kind of what we talked about a little bit with the football stuff of if you understand and what we're going to talk about here in a minute, if you can understand what's important for you at that moment, then you can learn strategies and skills to get focused in and more and better at concentrating on trying to get at those important pieces, even if those important pieces can be a little bit difficult or uncomfortable in the moment as well too. So I love these because again, I just think it just adds that credence to what we're doing in the field.
Yeah, and I think it helps tie a direct relationship between things that we work on and on field or in the pool actual results. So something this study alluded to in the original publication was that athletes that are more mentally tough and that have this higher pain self-efficacy were able to return from injuries faster, or that they weren't as worried about re-injury and things like this. So as an athlete, if you can get back to the field or the field of play a week or 2 weeks earlier because of this mental strength that you've worked on and this mental toughness that you've built. It can actually, like I said, put you weeks ahead of where you might be otherwise. So, there definitely is that direct mechanism from the mental skills to the on-field performances. Absolutely.
Sure.
And I think that's a great segue here, what you said into our main topic for today, which is developing really good evaluation strategies for after a performance. So ways to find the things that you want to improve, but also maintain the most optimal mental state and psychological state mindset moving forward, rather than letting criticisms and critiques kind of bog you down. So Mike, I think you had an excellent technique here that you work with your athletes. Maybe you can kick us off here.
Sure. Yeah, I always start out my sessions when I work with athletes and even when I work with teams and include this as a part of what they should be doing for themselves on a regular basis too. And that is essentially to ask themselves a series of questions. Usually it's three questions. What went well today or this week? And it could be anything. I've used this in various parts of an individual athlete's season. I'll take, if I'm working with an athlete and it's a preseason, I'll ask him, what the last couple of weeks of practice has gone like, what's gone well for them, and not only what's gone well, but why. So you can help yourself understand the good parts, but if you can put some of that why to it, then you could repeat it, right? Both physically and mentally. So if you're a golfer and you're working on a change in your swing and it's working well, you can point to that, as well as, you know what, I'm working on more staying in the moment, or using some small cues to stay focused. And if that's helping me, I want to know that too, so I can keep repeating that. So that's question number one. The second one is, okay, what could use some help? Where are we falling short a little bit? And the big part, as you alluded to, is not to be judgmental. Oh, I really stink at this. Why am I doing this? The self-talk, the negative self-labeling, and so forth can really kind of ramp up. But if you can kind of take a step back, this didn't go so well this week or during the game last night. How can I improve that? What have I learned from that? And again, it could be something physical, or it could be something on the mental game challenge side as well too. So it could be a technique that they need to improve on to help with their skill, but it also could be, I lost my composure there, or I lost my focus for a time during the game there, and that led to some additional mistakes. Okay, if that's what happened, then we can learn from that and see how we can incorporate a better process going into the following game, the following week, the following competition, however way that works. And then the third one I always ask my athletes to reflect on is what they learned about themselves. I don't think we ask ourselves enough that, just as humans, because we are so negative on ourselves and we beat ourselves up every chance we get, it seems like, that, what did we learn about ourselves? I was just working with a team here over the last couple of weeks. They struggled through a couple of games, and we asked that question, and a couple of the kids came up with some answers that were that they said it out loud. It was almost a revelation for them, and they came away from, even though they had a couple of tough losses, they still learned some things about themselves, both on the physical skill side, but I think more so on the mental game side, that they felt like they did well and that they could build upon. And it turned out then the game after that we talked, they ended up winning. I'm not sure how much our session helped with that, but I have to feel that part of that rolled into that game as well too. And if you could start to really feel good about some of the growth that you've made, that's just it just continues to fuel yourself on that confidence level and what I could be doing and the opportunities, and the bar continues to get raised for yourself about how much more you can do. So those three questions, I know they're kind of general, but that is what I try to incorporate when I work with athletes and teams as well too, to try and have them integrate those and to have them write it down. I think it's powerful to keep a journal and have that being written down instead of talking out loud is great, but having them put pen to paper with that can be very impactful as well too. I don't know what your experience is with some of this as well also.
Yeah, I do a very similar process, and I recommend all my athletes a very similar process. I want to take a step back though, and really address why we're recommending this and why we're talking about this. Um, as athletes, we're very self-critical, almost, necessarily so. That's how you improve. You can watch yourself play or talk to your coach about how you play and identify all of the things that you did wrong, right? That's how you identify areas for growth. As athletes, we get really good at that process. We get really good at finding all of our errors and all of our faults because then we hope that we address them. And I think it's that hope piece that I want to attack. And so with my strategy here and what I tell my athletes, this comes from Springfield College, their athletic counseling department, but we ask our athletes three questions. So good, just like you did, what went well? What did you do well? Better, what could go better? And then the third is how can you do it better? So, as you know, in my experience working with high level athletes, we're very good at the better piece. What do we want to do better? But it's not necessarily the planning that goes on after that is, we're missing that piece. So it's great to identify the things that went wrong, but now we have to have some strategy to address it. And so this is where, if you miss the game-winning shot in a basketball game, instead of being really upset about it for the next week until you get another shot, you think, I'm going to practice that shot every day, all week until the next game, and I'll be more confident for that shot. So it's the same inciting event, but it's two very different outcomes based on this choreographed process that we're planning. So the reason that Mike and I both have processes that we use is because if you don't have a process, then you're just going to let your brain kind of ruminate, and your brain will find all the things that you did wrong and then just marinate in it. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is that kind of identifying all the weaknesses and then internalizing those weaknesses. So, whether you choose the good, better, and what did I learn about myself, or good, better, how, it's really having some process in mind to avoid that cycle of rumination and negative thinking. So, that's kind of why we're addressing this process.
Yeah, and I think it just goes to show that the importance of uh, calling time out on yourself is the term I like to use a lot with athletes. Is just again, and you could use this process a lot of times. It's after a game or after a competition, but you could use this process at any point. If it's at the end of a preseason, before your first game for the season, you can kind of stop and ask yourself that the good, better, and how, and what have I learned about myself in this process after a game or after half of the season or even postseason. Okay, we can look comprehensively on a lot of different things, and I'm sure athletes do this on the physical side. What are my stats? Whatever sport you play, you've kept the number of physical stats, and that's important as well too. But where am I at and how do I use those in terms of these three questions as well too? So you can use this process at any point, but as you mentioned, Ian, the important piece here is to kind of pause every once in a while and on a regular basis to stop and kind of reflect. And that act of reflection can be very powerful for yourself to um, continue to build on the things that went well and objectively look at what things could be better and how can we do this better, and continue to fuel who you are as a person on that mental performance side as well too. It's an important process, no question about it.
Yeah, and I'm sure all of our listeners here have heard of the idea of growth mindset. It gets tossed around a lot about always looking for opportunities to improve yourself and as the name suggests, to grow. But this really is that process, because if you don't have some methodology in place to take an event and learn from it, then you're gonna just naturally be in that fixed mindset condition where you are the person that you are right now, and you're not really making any improvements. So this ties into the idea of growth mindset. And I also, in physical training, there's a process called super compensation that I think is really important for what we do. And so this is a physical process that I think has parallel ideas in psychology. But the idea is, when you stress your muscles, they get weaker, right? It's like the day after you go to the gym, you don't feel very strong. But then after that, your body recovers, and now once you they call it super compensate, so you're now stronger than you were beforehand. And so I think this is that this can happen in a lot of athletes psychologically as well. So if you have maybe not the best game or not the best race, you feel that stress, right? You're not as resilient, you're not as strong. But then if you can either stay there and now you're on a downward trajectory, or you can choose to grow. You can choose to super compensate, take that event and learn from it. And I think that's really the underlying mechanism for growth mindset. Evaluate and then grow from that information.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. Very important process.
Yeah. I also think it's important to talk about the three A's of change. This is something that we've talked about before, but it's not just sports specific. This is, to change really anything in your life. We have this idea of the three A's. So the first piece is to be aware. And that's what Mike and I are talking about here. We're trying to identify the things that you want to change, right? Become aware of those things. The second A is acceptance. And I think this is often the most overlooked piece, where we start to internalize all of our weaknesses, right? So you took a big shot at the end of your hockey game and you missed. Now you're not a shooter all of a sudden. Now you're somebody that can't be trusted with the game-winning shot, right? We're internalizing that one event. And so with the acceptance, it's really important to, look at yourself as somebody that's worth growing, right? You're worth improving. You're not just the sum of your mistakes, but you can make a mistake and still be a great player. There was a few. We just watched the Sports Center not top 10 plays, and they're like professional athletes scoring own goals on themselves, right? These are the best of the best that we have, and they still make mistakes. So recognizing that mistakes is always part of this growth and learning process. And then the last A is action. And that's where we actually take some behavior to fix it, right? So if you miss that shot, it might be taking some extra shots at the end of your practices, or might be fixing your conditioning, right? Whatever that thing might be. But if you hit the awareness, the acceptance, the action piece kind of comes naturally, because now it's something that you want to fix. And so we are more addressing the awareness and the acceptance pieces for now.
Yeah, and I think the biggest challenge for all of us in that is the acceptance piece, because again, as we talked about before, we love to beat ourselves up even for the smallest things. I think of golfers all the time who have really, really good rounds, and the only thing they want to talk about at the end of their round are the two bad holes they had or something like that. So the acceptance piece is a real challenge, and that's why we talk about trying to, and it is a challenge, trying to extricate the judgment from what just happened and trying to be as objective as possible. And the better we can get at that, we can get at accepting that. And then that, as you mentioned, Ian, rightly so, then that action piece becomes almost natural. Okay, we're aware of what happened. I get it. This is what happened. This is what I could work on, and this is how I could work on it. And that's where the action piece comes in then at the end as well too.
Yeah, one of the my favorite summations of this idea came from Ken Ravizza, who was the Chicago Cubs sports psychologist for a long, long time. But he would always say, get the information, forgive yourself, and then play on. And I think it's that information part that's really important. You said objective a few times, but really extract the raw data from what happened, right? Remove the subjectivity, the ego component, right? What happened? Think about your performance from like your coach's view, right? They just see what you did and they don't have any ego attachment or involvement. So
Right.
again, get the information, forgive yourself, and then play on. So
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think those are a few great ways to think about this process, but I think the overlying message is to just have some sort of repeatable, consistent process that you have that pushes you to grow no matter what happened, whether the result was great or not so great, you still can benefit.
Absolutely. Yeah. No question about it. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that brings us to our mental fitness challenge, which is just that. So, for all of our listeners here and viewers, we want you to think about your own reflection process, whether you choose, the good, better, how model, or as Mike mentioned, the good, better, and what did I learn about myself model. But we want to make sure that we have something in place so that your brain doesn't just kind of do its thing, which is often marinate in our failures and marinate in our mistakes. So, try something out. If it doesn't work, that's totally fine. These things aren't set in stone, but we want you to have some sort of process developed by the next time that we talk, which will be next year, next month. And we look forward to sharing with you all. So, Mike, do you have any thoughts about our mental fitness challenge or any tips for our audience?
No, I think we all can be kind of creative with that and play around with that a little bit. I've a big proponent of, as I mentioned before, of writing it down and using
Mm,
old school pen and paper. So if you could do that, nobody has to see it. You could just do it for yourself. Doesn't have to be extreme literature. It could be 4 words. It could be bullet points, however way you want to do it. But come up and play around with the system for yourself. And I think that's very valuable. Absolutely.
yeah, creativity here is important too. Absolutely. Well, that's a wrap here for episode 18 of the Mental Barbell Podcast. If you found value in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a teammate or coach. For more mental performance training and personalized coaching, visit thementalbarbell.com or follow us on social media at The Mental Barbell. Bye now.